Do you need help with your epoxy technique? When I first started using epoxy and making tumblers, I had every issue under the sun. I had dimples in my epoxy. There were a million issues all the time. Now that I'm more experienced in tumbler making, I understand where those issues were coming from and why they were happening. And today, I want to help you with that. But the number one thing you need to know about epoxy is that it is toxic. I know that you see lots of people on social media epoxying with no respirator or anything. Guys, everybody is welcome to do things the way that they want to do them. But if you are coming to my platform for help, I am going to educate you. Epoxy is toxic. There is not an epoxy that exists that is not toxic. Now, it does not matter if it smells or not. It could smell like roses, still toxic. It doesn't matter if it gives you a headache or not, it's still toxic. A lot of people say, well, it makes them sick because they're allergic. It's not even necessarily that you're allergic to epoxy. Everybody's skin reacts differently. I personally, my eyes get swollen, I get really bad migraines, and it's just because epoxy affects me differently. I'm more sensitive to it. However, whether it made me sick or not, I still have to take the same precautions because it is still toxic. The long-term effects of epoxy are not worth making beautiful cups right now. So if you can practice safely, I would highly recommend moving all of your epoxy outside to the garage where you have, the fumes outside. I highly suggest you looking for a epoxy-free alternative if you are not able to epoxy outside. My sweet friend Nikki from Nikki's Knacks is a Crystalac user, and on her account, she helps all the time. We've done Crystalac classes in my mentorship group, and we will continue to do Crystalac classes in my mentorship group. There are always ways for you to do this safely, okay? If you have any questions, please leave them down below and let me know if you like this type of video. Thank you. Besitos.
The number one tip I have for you working with epoxy are these reusable bottles. I get these on Amazon and they are amazing for you to put your epoxy in here and just label it part A and B. I love them because it's so much easier to pour my epoxy into my mixing cups when I'm going to use them. And I use plastic cups to cover the top part of these bottles so that no dust gets in there. I also use these plastic mixing cups from Amazon. I love them so much. I do not recommend using wooden popsicle sticks to mix your epoxy. I use plastic ones, but I'm out right now. And the most vital, the most important part of working with epoxy is having a proper respirator. I got this one on Amazon for $100 and I replace the filters every 1 to 2 months. Anytime you buy a respirator, always look at how long your filters last and replace them accordingly to whatever respirator it is that you have. Mine is for every 2 months and I always replace them. They're super easy to replace. I get the replacements on Amazon and they just screw on and off. Super duper easy. As you can see, all I have to do is twist it. Guys, I do not epoxy if I do not have this mask on my face. It does not matter if I am in a hurry. My safety always comes first because one day in the future, I do not want to have any sort of issues with my lungs or even more respiratory issues. It's just not worth it to me. And I know so many people don't know about it. So I just really want to educate you. I like to use scent-free baby wipes to wipe down my mask whenever I'm done. This is just to keep it clean. I always get glitter and dust on it. So I always just wipe it down and then dry it with a paper towel. Also, the more that I wipe my little face cover whenever I'm done, the more clear it is whenever I'm epoxying, so I can really see perfectly through it with no issues. And sometimes I get all sweaty, so I just like to keep my mask clean if possible. I also want to recommend that you store your epoxy in room temperature. I don't recommend having it outside in your garage if it's too hot. Anytime you buy epoxy from any company, always read the label because it'll always tell you how to store it and it'll also tell you the curing time for your epoxy. Every epoxy is different. So I'm going to show you guys how I mix my epoxy. This is my personal method that I have done for a really long time. If this doesn't work for you, that's okay. If you do it differently, that's okay. We all have different ways that we do things. This is personally, I have found is the best way that works for me. And I use less mixing cups by just using only one and not having to switch over cups, if that makes sense. So what I do is I always come down to eye level. I'm putting this tumbler behind so you can kind of see the numbers. I always come down to eye level, and I'm only going to do one thin coat over one cup. So I'm only going to do 10 mLs of part A and 10 mLs of part B. I always pour the part A first. It's a little bit of a heavier, thicker consistency. So I'm going to go ahead and pour that part A all the way up to the number 10. And then I'm going to come in and very carefully pour my part B all the way until it comes up to that 20. And I want to make sure that my measurements are exact. And as you can see here, because I put the heavier consistency one first, which is the part A, it keeps them separate so that I can see. And also it helps me so that I can get my measurements exactly to where they need to be. Guys, I've been doing my epoxy this way for as long as I can remember, and I cannot remember the last time I've had a sticky cup or a cup not cure. So this is what I was talking about when I was saying use plastic stirring sticks. I found one. I highly recommend only using plastic stirring sticks. The reason for that is because wood releases little splinters and they go into your epoxy, and they also cause more air bubbles because of the oxygen that the wood releases. Also, if you use silicone stirring sticks, they are not as easy to clean as you think they would be because everything sticks to them. So it's really easy for them to have little fibers on them or for them to have little tiny pieces of epoxy left over from the time before. And that's all residue that will end up in your epoxy. That is also why I do not use silicone mixing cups anymore. This is my method that I do, and it has worked the best for me. But like I said, we all do things differently, and that's totally amazing. I just want to share with you guys how I do it. And what I like to do is I like to mix my epoxy. I don't stir too aggressively in circular motions. A lot of people do, which is totally okay. But the more that I stir that way, the more that I get a ton of micro bubbles, and it's kind of hard to see. And the whole point is for me to be able to see when I've mixed my two epoxies perfectly and when they've blended perfectly into one. And so I like to prevent those super tiny micro bubbles by stirring aggressively. So also, I like to kind of hold my little measuring cup up against the light because I can completely see through this. And I can see if there's any little like veins in there left over from when I was mixing my epoxy and stuff like that. It's just the method that works the best for me. Once I have my epoxy completely mixed, and I know that I've mixed the part A and the part B perfectly, this is how I love to epoxy my cups. It's just, oh my gosh, I cannot remember the last time I had to sand a tumbler truly, like a lot. Like I literally just pass my sanding block over them, and sometimes I don't even do that. So what I like to do is I like to drizzle my epoxy over my cup, and I use one gloved finger and I very gently guide the epoxy as the cup is turning. Now guys, you're not gonna get that full coverage on that first spin, so don't chase your tumbler. It's gonna come back around. Just get whatever you can on there and gently spread it. Make sure you get the bottom. I always make sure I rub the bottom completely and the little edges around the bottom. And then once I have the bottom fully covered, what I like to do is I like to take one gloved finger, start at the bottom, and I rub my epoxy up. And I like doing this method because this helps me get the most even coat on my tumbler. And if I missed a spot, I can immediately feel it with my finger when I'm doing this. A lot of people like to epoxy with their whole hand, which is totally okay. I have found when I do that, my hand is heavy and it kind of pushes down on my tumbler, and it makes it so that it moves a little bit and it's no longer level with my little sponge inside. So I like to just use a very light, gentle finger so that I am not making my tumbler be unlevel. Having an unlevel tumbler is what causes fupas at the bottom of your tumblers, or if your tumbler turner is unlevel or your cup is unlevel, all of that stuff. So this is my favorite way to do it. I like to use a torch to pop my bubbles. I move my torch back and forth over my tumbler super duper fast. I do not let the flames touch the epoxy. I just hover it over so that it sucks up those air bubbles. I don't like using a heat gun because a heat gun just overheats your epoxy and only gets the surface level bubbles. I like using a torch the most. I use a torch from Lowe's. This is what it looks like. I also get the butane refills from Lowe's, and this is how you refill it. All you have to do is push down, and you can hear that going into the torch. And as you can see, you can control the flame and how high and how low it goes. And my final tip that I recommend is getting an acrylic cover. My dad made this. He got the supplies on Amazon. And I like to cover my tumblers because this keeps any dust off of them. Dust also causes bubbles. So once I'm done, I cover it and I come back when it's dry and I have a flawless finish every time. I hope this video has been helpful. Please let me know if you have any questions. Besitos!